Sitting up there.
Peter Mitchell.
Thank you for joining us again. Now we'll hear from Mr. Leo Hohmann. His website is leohohmann.com. That's LeoHohmann.com. Leo Hohmann is an investigative reporter. I've known him for a number of years. He's a courageous journalist who seeks out truth in order to educate his audience. And today, here at Regent University, Leo Hohmann will share his cutting-edge findings and warnings regarding the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is at the forefront of advancing global governance today, and I highly encourage those who are watching online to send a text or send an email or go on your Facebook. Invite your friends to hear Leo Hohmann's presentation and to join us now to hear this important message from Mr. Leo Hohmann. Leo?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction, Dean Bachman. I'm here today to talk about a new global system that maybe some of you haven't heard too much about, but it is rising up right now in our midst at this very moment in history on the world stage. Dr. Henry Kissinger and the late Zbigniew Brzezinski called it the new international economic order. That was back in the early 1970s. In fact, there's a great quote from Dr. Brzezinski that I love to share with my audiences. It comes from his book published in 1970 under the title, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. That book was dedicated, by the way, to his daughter, Mika Brzezinski, who still is a key player right now today in the information war being waged against we, the American people. This quote I'd like to share from his book sets the tone for my entire presentation. So let's read it together here and let it sink in. And remember, this was written 25 years before the internet and some 35 years before anyone heard of Facebook or Twitter. And he writes, the technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and maintain up-to-date, complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizens. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities, unquote. Now, I don't know about you, but that quote written in 1970 was prophetic, and it was very revealing. What he's talking about there is a new global movement that would have been unheard of in his day, but it was the technocracy movement. Now, let's define technocracy. What do I mean by that? Technocracy, according to the great Patrick Wood in his book, Technocracy Rising, is, as he calls it, the science of social engineering. The science of social engineering. I like to refine that a little bit more and call it the science of human control. The end goal of technocracy is a dictatorship where the most powerful people in society are not politicians, but unelected experts, bureaucrats, scientists, engineers, and data collectors in both the public and private sector. President George Herbert Walker Bush referred to this emerging system in 1990 as the New World Order. Joe Biden echoed that claim just last week in his speech in Poland, where he said a new world order was at the precipice, and he punctuated that by saying, quote, unquote, it's coming. Now it's fashionable among the elites today to reimagine the New World Order by calling it the Great Reset. That sounds less conspiratorial and much more 21st century. But it's really the same thing that the United Nations calls sustainable development, or Agenda 2030, with its 17 sustainability goals outlined 1 through 17. You can go on their site and read them. Whatever you wish to call it, I agree with Mr. Biden, it is coming. The question is, how will we respond? Will Christians stand against it when it gets here? And is it right now at the very door? I believe it is. The major power center pushing the Great Reset lies within the World Economic Forum. Based in Davos, Switzerland, that organization is led by its founder, Dr. Klaus Schwab. He's an economist and an engineer who is a citizen of Germany. It meets every year with the world's most powerful elites in attendance from all sectors of life: business, government, entertainment, academia, and technology. What we are talking about is the cultivation of a system that I like to refer to as the Fourth Reich. I've also called it the beast system. It shares many of the values and worldview characteristics of the Third Reich, that being a belief in a new master race, the use of eugenics, technology, and zero tolerance for dissent. This system, when fully implemented, marks the end, in my opinion, of pluralistic America. The Nazis had the death camps for those who they designated as unfit for society. The modern Western technocrats have big tech, big pharma, and a Planned Parenthood network of abortion clinics to perform essentially the same task of weeding out undesirables. Both believe in a system of rewards and punishments based on how obedient you are to the system. Do not confuse what you're see going on in America today with the communist revolution. In my personal opinion, a lot of conservatives make that mistake. They think that we're undergoing a communist revolution. Unlike the communists of old, the Third and Fourth Reichs believe in using, not eliminating, the wealthy capitalists who engage in free enterprise. The high priests of the Fourth Reich, like their ancestors in the Third Reich, are expert at using propaganda to create a cult of groupthink. They also call it the hive mind, if you will. The difference is that the Third Reich would throw you in a concentration camp if you did not conform to the propaganda messaging, whereas the leaders of the Fourth Reich would prefer to cancel you from your job, cancel you from your health care, your educational opportunities, and eventually they plan to cancel your bank account and therefore your ability to buy and sell. This will be all done through what? Digital health passports, digital money, and a little QR code on your cell phone. Eventually, it will go under your skin. Klaus Schwab says we should expect a new type of human being coming into emergence who will thrive in this type of a society. Under this system, you have no rights, only privileges. Driving a car, owning a single-family home or a family farm, owning a firearm, even having access to health care or a bank account will all be among the privileges you will either qualify for or you won't. Biden, just 2 weeks ago, Joe Biden issued an executive order calling on several federal agencies to formulate a plan to create a new digital dollar, which will be designed to eventually replace our physical paper currency. This new currency will not only be digital, it will be programmable and trackable. That means everything you buy, where you bought it, how much you paid, will be tracked by the government in real time. Such privileges will be doled out based on how obedient you are to the state and its corporate partners. Remember that part, corporate partners. What happened to the truckers in Canada when they did not stop their protests when they were told to get out of the streets? The government talked it over with the banks, and boom, within hours, their bank accounts were closed. Pay attention to how everything today is done in the name of PPPs. What are those? Public-private partnerships. Governments working in concert with private corporations. This is a much more powerful way of coercing their subjects to obey, especially in nations like the U.S., where we have a strong constitution and a history of limited government. Where the government is prevented from acting, they simply hand the ball off to their corporate partners, which employ millions of Americans and sign their paychecks. How did they get people to take the unproven experimental vaccine? They simply threatened their jobs. Now, if I can switch to our next slide here, I've got
force behaviors. And at BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
that man right there is Larry Fink. He is the president, founder, and CEO of the world's most powerful corporation, BlackRock. BlackRock owns between 4 and 6, up to 10% or more of almost every major company in the world that you can think of. And what was he talking about here? Forcing behaviors. The World Economic Forum, which he happens to also be on the board of trustees of, is the premier voice. They consider themselves the premier voice of public-private partnerships. This is key to understanding their mission. Whenever you hear Biden or some other politician talk about our partners in the private sector, you know they're a globalist following the World Economic Forum template, a template for total world domination. They do not represent you, the voter. They represent the interests of transnational corporations and the World Economic Forum. That's why the COVID response led to the demise of so many small businesses, while it was a gravy train for companies like Amazon, Walmart, Costco, and Home Depot. Look at the response to the recent invasion of Russia into Ukraine. This was the first time in human history we saw a complete synchronization of government and private corporations. No sooner did the government say we want to put sanctions on Russia, and McDonald's, GE, all the major companies pulled immediately out of Russia and announced it with much fanfare. Now, the other thing we need to know about the people at the World Economic Forum is they are very much into the transhumanist agenda. They have no regard for humanity. They have no regard for personal liberty or the pursuit of happiness by independent, critical thinking citizens. God created us with a free will, right? But under the technocratic movement, you are denied ownership over everything. That includes not just your physical assets, but your body and even your mind. They say you will own nothing, have no privacy, but somehow you'll be happy. The new definition of happiness, of course, is you accepting the idea that you are no longer in control of your own body or thoughts. They tell you that the size of your house, they tell you what size of house you can live in, what type of car you can drive, how much energy you should be able to use per year, what your carbon footprint will be, right down to what you can eat. Meat, as the Hoffs hinted in their presentation, meat is now evil. Gas-powered vehicles are evil. They intend to basically price you out of all these options as a middle-class American. The idea is to coax you into behavioral changes, as Larry Fink suggested. When the carrot doesn't work, they will switch to the stick. This requires, as Klaus Schwab says, changing not only our way of thinking, but changing you physically. How? By creating transhumans, or what they call humanity 2.0. How many of you are familiar with transhumanism? Transhumanism is the merging of man with machine to form a new hybrid being, no longer fully human in the way that we think of humanity today. It's a whole new species. In their view, it's the process, it's the next stage of evolution. This will be achieved through gene editing and artificial intelligence driven by computer algorithms. Take a listen to what Mr. Schwab had to say about this subject, and this was back in 2016.
Aujourd'hui, au bout de ça, on parle de puces qu'on pourra s'implanter. Ce sera quand ça?
Certainement dans les 10 années à venir. Et d'abord, on va les implanter dans nos vêtements, c'est-à-dire wearables, comme on le dit. Et après, on pourrait s'imaginer qu'on les implante dans nos cerveaux ou dans notre peau. Et à la fin, peut-être il y a une communication directe entre notre cerveau et le monde digital. Ce que nous voyons, c'est une sorte de fusion du monde physique, digital et biologique.
On appelle quelqu'un, on n'a même plus le réflexe de devoir prendre un appareil, ça se fait naturellement. Hein. La technique continue le corps.
Oui, vous parlez, vous dites, je veux maintenant être connecté avec n'importe qui. Hein? Et d'abord, vous avez les robots personnalisés. Et j'ai vu que M. Zuckerberg a prédit qu'à la fin de l'année, il va avoir son robot, son butler personnalisé qui est à sa disposition.
Donc, comme dans Downton Abbey, on aura son butler personnel, son serviteur, son esclave.
Oui, mais il y a une différence. C'est un serviteur qui, avec l'intelligence artificielle, apprend et qui n'est pas seulement votre assistant pour des travaux manuels, qui peut vraiment être un partenaire intellectuel de vous.
Okay, so you get an idea there of what he's thinking about in terms of transhumanism. I didn't mean to skip over this one here. When Larry Fink is talking about forcing and using corporations to help force people to change their behaviors, this is just one small example of how they're looking to change our behaviors. And this is just on the topic of transportation. They have behavioral changes planned for every facet of your life. And we don't have time to go into all of them. But let's just look at one, transportation. And Pete Buttigieg, by the way, is our transportation secretary right now. He is a graduate of Klaus Schwab's Young Global Leaders program at the World Economic Forum. These are the policies that he is pushing. They want to make public transportation cheaper so more people will ride on the public transit. They want to have car-free Sundays in large cities where the whole city on Sunday will be free of vehicles. They obviously want more people to work from home. They want alternative to private car use in large cities. Promote efficient use of freight trucks and good delivery. Prefer high-speed trains to planes. Well, I wouldn't be here right now if I had to get on a train because it would be much slower and I wouldn't have gotten here on time. But I don't count. Businesses need to change their behavior. Okay.
Let's talk about food shortages.
The whole idea.
To the next one. Now, when we listen to Mr. Schwab and his frankly bizarre ideas about connecting people's brains to the internet, where does he get these ideas? Well, I did a little research and found out that they're not his own, even though he came out with a book, COVID-19 and the Great Reset, within basically 2.5 months of COVID being discovered on the world scene. He came out with a book saying we need to use COVID to bring in these new ways of controlling people. Well, then I found out that his chief advisor at the World Economic Forum is a man named Yuval Noah Harari. And Mr. Harari is an interesting character. He is a professor of history at a university in Jerusalem, in Israel. He's fairly well known in Israel, but basically unknown here in the United States. He's the chief advisor to Mr. Schwab, and he says we are, quote, hackable animals as human beings, and as such, we can be reprogrammed. Let's take a look at Mr. Harari.
The whole idea that humans have, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. Free will, that's over.
That's over.
Over. Today, we have the technology to hack human beings on a massive scale. Yeah, I mean, everything is being digitalized. Everything is being monitored. In this time of crisis, you have to follow science. It's often said that you should never allow a good crisis to go to waste, because a crisis is an opportunity to also do good reforms that in normal times people will never agree to. But in a crisis, you see, we have no chance. So let's do it.
Vaccine won't help us go to the
vaccine
test, of course.
will help us, of course. It will make things, more manageable.
Surveillance, people could look back in 100 years and identify the coronavirus epidemic as the moment when a new regime of surveillance took over, especially surveillance under the skin, which I think is maybe the most important development of the 21st century, is this ability to hack human beings, to go under the skin, collect biometric data, analyze it, and understand people better than they understand themselves. This, I believe, is maybe the most important event of the 21st century.
By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it.
Natural selection is replaced by intelligent design. The era of inorganic life is now beginning.
In the coming decades, AI and biotechnology will give us godlike abilities to re-engineer life and even to create completely new life forms. We are about to enter a new era of inorganic life shaped by intelligent design. Our intelligent design.
Okay, so that is bizarre sounding, I know, but please do not make the mistake of thinking that this young man, I think he's about 45, is just sort of a pie-in-the-sky daydreamer. This is the guy that the world's elites have called a prophet. Barack Obama called him his favorite author. He's been praised by Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and of course Schwab. And so this is a man that we should listen to, because while what he's saying sounds bizarre, he's thinking 2, 3, 5 to 10 years down the road. So while the God of the Bible has created you in his image with a body, soul, and spirit, people like Schwab, Gates, and Harari deny all of that. They do see the essence of the human being as triune, similar to the body, soul, and spirit. But instead of that, they see a physical, biological, and digital identity. You saw Schwab referring to that and saying in the fourth industrial revolution, which is upcoming, part of the Great Reset, these three identities, your biological, physical, and digital identity, will all be fused into one. This is Satan's, in my opinion, this is Satan's counterfeit, a perversion of God's crowning achievement in creation. Satan is using transhumanism, seeking to recreate the human species according to man's idea of what makes the perfect person. Are you starting to see now this system differs from standard communism? This is why I say we are not being taken over by communists. They're simply one of the many tools on the way to a technotronic utopia. Useful idiots, if you will. We are being taken over by something even more sinister. Global predators who adhere to a type of fascism, only I believe it's much more subtle than World War II German version of fascism. The modern technocratic dictatorship operates under the assumption that the best slave is one who thinks he is free. The great novelist Aldous Huxley understood this and predicted it back in 1931 when he said, quote, "The perfect dictatorship would be the appearance of a democracy, but would basically be a prison without walls, in which the prisoners would not even dream of escaping. It would essentially be a system of slavery where, through consumption and entertainment, the slaves would love their servitudes," unquote. The key there is deception. They woo you in with their exciting technology and lies about how it will make your life better, more convenient, more productive, safe, and secure. They use all the buzzwords. This is more dangerous, in my opinion, than Stalin's use of brute force. Whereas the old Soviet Union communists crushed the churches, The Fourth Reich, just like its predecessor in the Third Reich, believes it can co-opt the churches. Only those churches that do not buy into the system will be persecuted. Like the Third Reich before it, the Fourth Reich worships science and data and uses it to its advantage, not yours. Science and data get weaponized against their opponents. If you dissent from their narrative, you are not, quote, following the science. In terms of propaganda, they have weaponized not only the media, but the public education systems against the principles of the Bible and our Constitution. Now there are some differences, I'm going to point out, between the Third Reich and the Fourth Reich. Instead of being nationalist like the Third Reich, the Fourth Reich is globalist. Instead of cultivating obedient citizens of Germany or Austria, they want global citizens with no love of any particular nation. That's why they're in the business of destabilizing nations right now. Violent crime, open borders, the drugging of America, the circuses, the inflation, stoking racial divisions, that all plays into destabilization. Before you can have the Great Reset, you must have the Great Collapse. That's why they weaponize everything and go from one crisis to the next until the West, in particular the United States, is totally destabilized. Remember Harari's statement that we just heard a second ago on the screen. They must take advantage of crises because it is only in a crisis that you can get people to go along with radical changes that they would normally resist. Klaus Schwab has said that COVID should be used as a, quote, narrow window of opportunity to transform society, and that these changes will be permanent. So in the end, they've weaponized the public education system, they've weaponized the media, they've weaponized the border, 200,000 people per month coming in, we don't know who they are, weaponized the healthcare system, everything with a singular goal in mind, the collapse of the United States of America as we know it. Harari said that pandemics would be used in particular to usher in this new system that he and Schwab have called the Great Reset, that others have called the New World Order, and that I'm calling the Beast System. Now, I believe the biggest crises are yet to come, that COVID-19 was just the first phase. But the pandemics did serve its purpose. It got people used to obeying unscientific, illogical rules, wearing a mask that doesn't protect you, conducting more of your life online as opposed to in person, learning to accept your employer dictating to you what your healthcare decisions should be, to the point of receiving regular injections of an unknown chemical substance. They want you to believe it's impossible to look at someone and know whether they're male or female. The Bible says God created us as male and female, so they must say the opposite, and you must believe them. This whole thing is built around a system of rewards and punishments. Remember in George Orwell's 1984 novel, his classic book, 1984, Winston, and you remember he was sitting in this interrogation room, and his interrogator held up 3 fingers. And he asked Winston, how many fingers do I have up? And Winston kept saying 3, but that was the wrong answer. Winston had to say it was 4 because the party told him it was 4. Winston could not be released back into society until he believed that the number was whatever his interrogator told him it was, not what he saw with his own eyes. It's the same today. That's why the Supreme Court nominee, Judge Jackson, just last week said she could not define what makes a woman because she knew that that definition could change tomorrow, and she would have been on record with the wrong answer. So they accomplished a lot from this last crisis, the pandemic, but they've got a problem. They discovered that roughly 70% of America was willing to abide by any and all of these nonsensical edicts. the lockdowns of small businesses and churches while Walmart and liquor stores were allowed to stay open, the constant testing and quarantining of healthy people. At least 70% of Americans believed all these lies and they obeyed, either out of fear of the virus or fear of their fellow citizens, peer pressure. But here's the problem. They were able to manipulate 70%, but they still have 30% to contend with, the resistors. How do they plan to bring them into line? You can't have a great reset, which claims to fundamentally transform every facet of our lives, with 30% of the people in the world's most prosperous country, the U.S., opting out. UN Agenda 2030 openly states that this is the plan for all people, everywhere. No person will be left behind. That's a direct quote from the agenda. That's why the globalists at the World Economic Forum have at least 2 or 3 more crises in their bag of tricks. They have talked about a coming massive cyber attack that would target our banking system and possibly our electric grid. They've been talking openly about World War III for the first time in my life. I was born in the early 60s. World War III with Russia. They've been talking about severe food shortages. No one alive in America has ever heard this kind of talk from an American president, but now we're hearing it from Joe Biden.
So talk about food shortages, and it's going to be real. The price of these sanctions is not just imposed upon Russia; it's imposed upon an awful lot of countries as well, including European countries and our country as well. And because both Russia and Ukraine have been the breadbasket of Europe in terms of wheat, for example, just to give one example. But we had a long discussion in the G7 with both the United States, which has a significant, the 3rd largest producer of wheat in the world, as well as Canada, which is also a major producer. And we both talked about how we could increase and disseminate more rapidly food shortages. And in addition to that, we talked about urging all the European countries and everyone else to end trade restrictions on sending limitations on sending food abroad. And so we are in the process of working out with our European.
Because he will drone on forever. I'll come. There's no better way to destabilize a nation, a region, or the world than to create food shortages. And here you have a president admitting that his own policy is going to create food shortages. Biden said they're going to mitigate those food shortages by sending more food out of the U.S. to other countries, while at the same time he's opening our borders and inviting the world to come here. That sounds to me like a recipe for disaster, and I expect food rationing and bread lines perhaps within the next year here in America. None of this is incompetence. It's all by design. Gas prices, $4 a gallon, that's not by accident. Food prices soaring, and eventually food shortages. None of that will be an accident. They've already foretold it. They must collapse the U.S. dollar-based global economy before they can fully implement the Great Reset, the crowning achievement of which will be a digital global money system and a digital global ID system. That's when you have the final phase of the Great Reset and the onset of the long-coveted New World Order. Whether they are successful or not depends on you. Will you blindly walk into their trap during the next crisis, or will you resist? Thank you.
Leo Hohmann, thank you so much for that great presentation. It's tough to hear, but important to hear. Again, Leo Hohmann, LeoHohmann.com. He's an investigative reporter. Well, our next